Now, worldwide, we're looking at around 590 million people globally. In India alone, it's something like 85 million, maybe a bit more than that. And this is projected to grow massively over the coming years. So type 2 diabetes, this is a chronic condition.
The number that we are seeing, hearing are from various data sources, and it seems like the real numbers are way more than that, particularly in India, also because of absence of diagnosis or absence of central repository of reporting. And it seems like it's an issue that's plaguing almost in every family in the entire country. Welcome to our weekly show. We discuss a bunch of things about running, and we've been doing it for 4 years now, 225 episodes, and continuing to go strong. And it is a great pleasure to have you speaking with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
As we were discussing backstage, you're building something that is very meaningful, not only for athletes, but almost for everyone. You're building a solution and awareness about something that's become very inclusive, not in the right way though. That is, we see almost every family being impacted with this in one or another way. And so what you are going to solve with your product is going to solve a very prevalent issue globally. That is through data insights and suggestions to manage diabetes, type 1 and type 2 both. Thank you for doing that, as I was saying. And we will get into discussing all of these more in detail as we progress. But I thought it will be of great value to first discuss what's your academic background, how your interest came in being in this particular area, and what led you to make a product that you made.
Thank you. Yeah. So my name's Sam Scott. I'm originally from the UK. My sort of journey along this area, I would say, started when I was doing my PhD in Liverpool. And I always thought that I was going to go sort of down the more traditional biochemistry route, because a large component of the PhD involved taking muscle biopsies, studying them under the microscope, looking to explore different ways by which people adapted to exercise from a physiological level. Yeah. But within the projects that I was doing, another large component involved doing these clinical studies with real human beings living with diabetes, where I was spending a lot of time understanding the day-to-day challenges involved in simply starting to do a bike ride, simply starting to do exercise, the recognition that so many people would be newly diagnosed, especially with type 1 diabetes, who I was working very closely with, and the doctors often suggesting, stop exercising for the time being, let's sort everything else out, and then feeling as though exercise was something that would be perhaps never incorporated back into their life, at least not at the level at which they were doing it before the diagnosis. So this really motivated me to focus on this much more heavily. So after finishing my PhD in Liverpool, I then went to Toronto, because Toronto has a huge focus on type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes. It's where the first insulin injections were given. It's where insulin was first developed. Focused on this completely, doing different clinical trials. While I was doing that, I ended up being more and more involved with a cycling team where all of the athletes had type 1 diabetes. So this was a pro cycling team. This experience led to an amazing opportunity to move to Switzerland, where I was then leading a clinical research group where it was all around nutritional, behavioral, technological interventions to manage glucose in sort of a clinical lab setting. And then on the other side of that, working with professional athletes, data collection, better understanding how they were competing at the level that they were, what was involved to get people to that level of sport. And that's what motivated me to then leave those positions to focus entirely on this startup that I've co-founded called Enhanced, because I recognized that there was a real need to do something in this area.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And as I was saying right in the start, it is very meaningful that you're doing. So huge thank you again for doing that. Let's dig a little deeper into the problem of diabetes, type 1 and type 2 both, and understand both of these at a elementary level to start with. What are these situations? Why both of these happen? And who are the type of people these may be happening to? And then we'll build further as to how your startup is helping solve for it.
Yeah, so diabetes is kind of an umbrella term, you could say. There's different types of diabetes. The most common are type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes is the most common. This affects now worldwide, we're looking at around 590 million people globally. In India alone, it's something like 85 million, maybe a bit more than that. And this is projected to grow massively over the coming years. So type 2 diabetes, this is a chronic condition. And it's where your body stops responding so well to insulin. So it stops when you eat a meal that contains carbohydrates. What's supposed to happen is that your pancreas will release the hormone insulin so that the glucose that enters the bloodstream is taken into the muscles so that your body is not kind of exposed to this high level of glucose after a meal. With type 2 diabetes, it's largely driven through lifestyle-related factors, although there are strong genetic components. So sitting too much, sedentary behavior, not doing that much activity, also dietary components, so high carbohydrates in the diet, etc. This over a number of years leads to your body not being able to respond so well to the carbohydrates. You then gradually move to a state of insulin resistance, and then this causes full-blown type 2 diabetes.
Can we stay at type 2 diabetes for a minute? Because I think it's so important for people to understand. While our listeners are quite aware, but they are possibly more aware about their training and paces than about diabetes. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to understand a little more in detail. As I understood from what you said so far, that is, it's a chronic condition which is prevalent globally. The number that we are hearing are from various data sources, and it seems like the real numbers are way more than that, particularly in India, also because of absence of diagnosis or absence of central repository of reporting. And so the real numbers are claimed to be significantly higher. And it seems like it's an issue that's plaguing almost in every family in the entire country. As we progress, I also understood that insulin, in very simple terms, is your glucose regulator in the bloodstream, mm-hmm. Where pancreas are like dump trucks being sent by the municipal corporation to clear clear your bloodstream from the glucose that's in the bloodstream, so that it can be sent to other parts of the body, which are important, where glucose is needed, for example. Now, I wanted to understand this whole process itself for a minute. When we consume something, say we are consuming carbohydrate, either simple or complex, what is happening then? Is it that the glucose is going to the bloodstream directly in certain amounts, and the body needs to regulate beyond a particular beyond a particular number that's available in the bloodstream? How much of glucose are we talking about when we talk about in bloodstream that's needed, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it will depend on the type of carbohydrate, the composition of it, because different carbohydrates are metabolized differently when they're consumed. But if you take, just for simplicity, if
Yeah,
you consume a drink that contains glucose, so that will, and imagine as well, just to kind of show how good your body is at buffering this, imagine you contain a drink that contains 100 grams of glucose. This
yeah,
isn't impossible to conceive of. Um, in the bloodstream, what your body is aiming to do is keep within a tight normal range. This is like 5 millimoles per liter. This is the value. Think of that as, in terms of amount or quantity, it's about 5 grams. So about the same size as what fits in a teaspoon. This is the entire amount of glucose, which is in a like 70 kilo adult male. So like on
wow,
average, your body is trying to keep that small teaspoon level of sugar. The reason that it needs to be there is because that the sugar is required for some basic physiological processes, mainly for fuel to the brain, because your brain relies on glucose to function.
yeah,
And this is why if your blood sugar level goes too low, then you'll kind of feel like a bit faint or whatever, because your brain is not receiving the energy that it needs. On the other hand, if glucose goes higher, especially over a longer period of time, it's quite toxic, and glucose causes very serious damage to tissues around the body. And the first place it's going to cause that damage will be to small blood vessels. So think like in the end of your fingers, think like your eyes, the kidneys, etc. This is why people who experience higher glucose levels over a long period of time have these complications, such as like the blindness, the problems with their feet, the problems with the kidneys, etc. So your body isn't wanting to just get rid of all the glucose, it's just trying to keep it within this range, which is balanced between enough for energy and low enough that it's not going to cause damage within the body. So if you go back to what happens when you consume, say you have that drink that has a load of glucose, that's entering like into the stomach, and then it's releasing into the bloodstream. The body, in anticipation of the meal, will even start releasing insulin. But and this will be done in accordance, like your body is very smart, it knows how much insulin to release. And then what this does is it helps the glucose enter cells in the muscle, in the liver, in fat tissues, etc. It serves two purposes. Basically, it's the purpose of removal from the bloodstream so that you maintain that normal level, and also so that it can be used for energy at a later date. So in the case of the muscles, it will enter there, and then it will be converted into glycogen, which is a fuel source that can be then used when you're doing exercise, for example.
got it. Very informative, and it just makes me even more curious. So, I ate food, went in my stomach. From there, glucose enters my bloodstream. I'm about 70 kilo, so I should ideally have about 5 gram of
Mm-hmm.
sugar in my bloodstream. If it's more than that, which will be the case because I've just eaten, for example, the the insulin response is to clear that additional glucose from my bloodstream and take it to different cells, different muscles, working muscles if I'm working out, etc. And those are getting utilized at different places. Now, when I'm eating, and what goes in my stomach, is there a way for body to differentiate as to at what speed it goes in the bloodstream versus not. For example, if I drink a very sugary juice, at times I get a sugar rush.
Mhm.
And but if I have a equally sweet fruit, whole fruit, that is not the case because I feel a lot more satiated and I don't get that sugar rush. So what could be the difference here?
Yeah, so in the case of the fruit, for example, you'll notice that there's a difference between when you have pure orange juice versus when you eat an orange. You've
Yeah,
got the juice within there, but the difference is that you have the fiber alongside the orange. The fiber slows down the rate of digestion. It therefore slows down the rate at which this enters the bloodstream. Um, the other thing to consider there as well is that a lot of sugars from fruit juices are not actually just pure glucose. They're other types of sugars, such as fructose. So fructose is an example of like an alternative sugar. It's metabolized different. So this will not enter the bloodstream directly in the same way. So it's it's kind of oversimplified to think that like consuming a certain amount of sugar will have a specific impact. It will depend, of course, on what you eat it with. If you have fiber, if you have fat alongside it, it will prolong the rate at which this is digested, how it enters. This is why if you have type 1 diabetes, which maybe we can talk about more in the future, and if you're experiencing very low blood glucose levels, you will need to treat that very quickly to get your blood glucose higher so that you have enough energy for your brain, etc., for functioning. In that case, you would want to consume just pure glucose as quickly as possible to get those blood glucose levels up. What you wouldn't do is consume like an orange because that would be way too slow.
got it, got it. So as I understood, type 2 diabetes seems like it's at the onset of excessive glucose in your bloodstream, and type 1 does not seem to be the same. What is type 1 diabetes in that case? Because so far we covered the basics of type 2 diabetes.
So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. So for some reason that's currently unknown, whether it's environmental, there seem to be genetic components related to this. Your pancreas, like the cells within the pancreas, they're called the beta cells. These are the specific cells that produce insulin. The body attacks those, destroys them, and then you're no longer able to make this key hormone. As a consequence, very quickly, you'll experience the symptoms, they'll lead to the diagnosis, and then for the rest of your life, unfortunately, you'll need to monitor your blood glucose levels. You'll need to administer insulin exogenously rather than relying on your body's ability to do this in order to maintain safe and normal blood glucose levels.
Got it. And is this also led by lifestyle or it's mostly genetic?
Um, it's not entirely clear the amount of genetic component that there are. There does seem to be some. It also isn't clear on the degree to which the environment has an impact on this. So there are data that suggest that certain parts of the world have a greater incidence of type 1 diabetes, whether it's related to something in the environment related to the type of food that's available, or it's related to weather conditions. For example, some of the highest prevalence conditions are Finland, Canada, and it's being hypothesized that this is related to like a lower level of sunlight that's available in these countries, because some of the lower incidences are places like China, where there is a much higher level of daylight throughout the day. It's not driven in the same way as type 2 diabetes is, through kind of sedentary activity, like kind of nutrition related things. It's a completely different way in which that this develops.
Got it. Got it. Now, when we look at it from a endurance performance point of view, and I'm progressing to that because we've set the context how diabetes, blood glucose level regulation is important. Now, when we think of performance, one of the things that has been much talked about and seems to be very effective is right nutrition during the workout, before and after the workout. And when we think of endurance workouts, some of these are fairly long. And one of the important source that we rely on to get energy is simple carbohydrate. With when we are working out for a longer period of time, we do need energy fairly quickly, and in ways that it can be absorbed quickly, and we do not have any gut indigestion issues, etc. Now, how the situation changes for someone who's diabetic, and how should they be looking at their carbohydrate intake while they are working out? And this is a question that has come from various athletes. Our listeners are good amateur athletes, so they may not be a 2 hour 10 marathoner, but there are many who are 230, 240, 250 and longer. If they have these issues, how should then they look at their training, and what kind of changes they should be looking at?
I think that this is a huge topic. This is a really interesting thing. So I think the first point to kind of highlight is just sort of like exercise is just like magic for how good it is for helping with all of these metabolic processes, for helping to manage glucose, etc. So one of the things that we didn't mention before when it relates to glucose management, etc., is we spoke about the hormone insulin and how important this is, but we didn't speak about muscle contractions and how important muscle contractions are in terms of their role in managing blood glucose levels. So when you think of what happens physiologically to manage blood glucose, glucose is in the bloodstream. The insulin acts on receptors which cause glucose to enter the muscle through a certain pathway. Muscle contractions also trigger these glucose transporters to take in glucose. And interestingly, muscle contractions are never impacted by if you have diabetes. So these pathways still remain intact. And so if you have type 2 diabetes, if you have type 1 diabetes, exercise will still be a very powerful tool to help manage glucose levels. And there's different examples that we can see that show the power of this. So there's really good solid evidence to demonstrate the importance of or the kind of the impact of going for just a 30-minute walk after you've had a meal. And the reason is that when you eat, you're relying on insulin to bring your glucose levels back down to a normal state. But if you go out for a walk, you're adding the muscle contractions, which is not particularly kind of exhaustive or hard or whatever, but it still has a huge impact, which will greatly lower the spike in that glucose trace. And this helps to basically reduce the pressure that's put on your pancreas in terms of releasing insulin. So you can use physical activity or exercise as a way to reduce the risk of developing pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Or if you're living with type 1 diabetes, you can have it as within your toolbox to assist in the insulin regime that you're using to help manage your glucose. So you can sort of incorporate physical activity or exercise in order to manage your glucose. It's a little bit complicated, but with a little bit of experience, it's quite easy to sort of fit within. Another thing that sort of highlights the importance or power of muscle contractions, exercise in this is, think of professional cyclists, for example. These guys are consuming 70, 90, 100 grams of carbs per hour while they're on the bike, and they will not develop type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. In fact, they'll be incredibly insulin sensitive. And the reason is because the carbohydrates that they're consuming are being managed largely through the amount of exercise that they're doing and that level of sensitivity to like taking in the glucose that they have.
Okay. So is there a different pathway for it? For example, if there is muscle contraction, in that case, you said pancreas do not need to work as hard. So is the glucose going to working muscles using a different system?
Yeah, it's a slightly different metabolic pathway. And this is also interesting because it means that, this is getting a little bit more complicated, but it's important for somebody living with type 1 diabetes who might be injecting insulin to account for the muscle contractions. Because if you, say on day one, you have a meal, you take your insulin, which you think is going to cover that, you will have a good kind of blood glucose response. But on day two, if you have your meal, take your insulin, and then you do some exercise shortly after, the two pathways are activated in parallel, and they can actually be additive. And the problem that this has is that insulin plus muscle contractions equals glucose goes down very quickly. And this is what people living with type 1 diabetes have to be aware of, that they're not sort of stacking the insulin on top of exercise, because this is what leads to hypos.
Wow, very interesting. So now, if we can take each of the two situations, that is, if someone is diabetic type 2, and then we take someone who's diabetic type 1, what do they need to look at from a nutrition point of view while working out and before and after? For example, if we think of a 3-hour run and I'm type 2 diabetic, I want to still nutritionally fuel myself. How do I look at my nutrition? Should it be as it is for any other athlete, or I need to look at CGM that is watching my glucose level for me, and in accordance to that, I'm having nutrition while I'm working out and before and after?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it will depend really on the individual that's there. So we're going to be making a lot of generalizations here. So in type 2 diabetes, the sort of readiness for exercise in that case will depend on different things like the age of the individual, the history, like medical history, if there are kind of risk of additional complications around exercise, such as cardiovascular risk issues. This is something where they'll probably be best to speak to the healthcare professional, because it might be that this individual hasn't exercised that much in recent years. It might be that they're carrying a little bit extra weight, could be risk of sort of balance or joint issues. There might be additional medications. Also needing to look at whether their type 2 diabetes means that they are taking insulin or they're not taking insulin, because it's sort of a spectrum. If you think of the way that the insulin doesn't just stop producing, the pancreas doesn't just stop producing insulin from day 1 to day 2, it just gradually stops producing so much. So when the time becomes that they need to start taking insulin, then this will mean that there's those additional considerations around exercise, glucose, risk of low blood glucose, etc. So it's a difficult one to answer on the side of type 2 diabetes. If they are going to go for a 3-hour run, we can probably assume that they've been training a bit, they've kind of quite comfortable with this. Again, it will come down to the goals, whether it's a competitive event or whether it's training, because the goals for somebody with type 2 diabetes most commonly will be things like usually less kind of competitive focused. It will be more around managing weight, managing blood glucose levels, getting into exercise, more of the competing aspects. And in that sense, it will be an understanding of what would I need to fuel in order to get through the bout of exercise, but at the same time, I don't want to undo the amount of work that I'm doing from a weight management perspective. I want to make sure that what I'm consuming is healthy and etc. I know it's not a very clear answer. It's kind of difficult, and it will depend entirely. On the side of type 1 diabetes, I think it's a little bit easier to answer this question because type 1 diabetes, there are a lot of people who are doing competitive events. We've worked with even professional athletes across different types of sports in this area. And the fueling requirements seem to be largely the same as somebody who does not have type 1 diabetes, in that you are trying to make sure that you are meeting the demands of the particular exercise bout. So if you think that you're trying to run a marathon, for example, you need to ensure that you have done everything in the preparation around carbohydrate loading. You need to make sure that you've got a fueling strategy, because you're going to be burning a lot of fuel throughout that. You need to make sure that you have the carbohydrates available in order to maintain the pace that your competitors have. The challenge with type 1 diabetes is in watching this in tandem with your blood glucose levels, because although you're needing to consume a lot of carbs, you're also needing to watch whether you need to take additional insulin if your glucose is rising high, or if you're at risk of hypoglycemia, you're perhaps needing to fuel with carbohydrates, not for the energy itself, but to balance those glucose levels.
Got it. Yeah, no, you're right. It is a complex topic, so fair generalization is okay. And when I talked about a 3 hours training run, I did mean someone who's intermediate and has been training for a while. And it was more from a fueling point of view, because a lot of doctors, they give you generic advice, and at times even the advices that are there are very different than what may actually be needing, what may actually be needed by an amateur runner during run, because they're not experts in giving us nutrition advice for a sport event, for example, or a long run for that matter. So my question was primarily from a fueling point of view, and not at all clinically any advice to be given, for sure.
Okay. I mean, like if we take type 1 diabetes, the majority of exercise guidelines around this is mostly around the minimal physical activity guidelines. It tends to be around how do we manage blood glucose during a 30-minute cycle ride or a 30-minute gym session, etc. And there's no kind of consideration around the additional needs or requirements that many people have in terms of sport. yes, it's true that a lot of people want to go and just do recreational gym session or something, but there's also a lot of people who enjoy competition. They want to really push themselves. They want to get to that next level. And this is something that's really a passion of mine, is helping people to not just do the smallest amount, but really get to where your competitive or your personal goals are in exercise. We've worked with some really high level athletes. We did a few studies looking at fueling requirements specifically in professional cyclists with type 1 diabetes. And when we did these projects, we were interested in the fueling and insulin dosing strategies that they were already assuming. So there was the example of this professional cycling team we were following. All of these athletes were competing against athletes who take their glucose for granted. So all their competitors are thinking of is fueling for the work required. So their preparation strategies, their fueling strategies are all focused on how do I get the energy in to be able to compete at this level. Whereas the athletes that we were working with, all of the time, they're trying to balance that 5 grams of glucose, that teaspoon of glucose, while making sure that they are on the same level as everybody else who is taking their glucose levels for granted. So there's all kinds of considerations that they have in the lead up in terms of fueling, the insulin dosing that they're having, and then during the event. And what we found during these projects were that these athletes were consuming carbohydrate intakes which were very, very similar to what we would expect, on average around 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour, mostly from very fast-acting carbs because they were taken like on the bike. So it's things like gels, bars. And if you were not to do exercise during this time, if you were to just sit in a seat and consume that much sugar, you would have a real problem. Your glucose would be through the roof. But because they're doing so much work on the bike, their glucose levels were in a very good kind of target range during that time. And we also were monitoring the pattern of insulin dosing while they were doing this. And we found that they weren't administering insulin that much while actually cycling. And this shows just how important exercise is in terms of bringing glucose out of the bloodstream into the muscles, that sort of alternative pathway to insulin. And I think that these learnings are really powerful to transfer to like the general population, to recognize just how big of an impact that incorporating regular physical activity, breaking up your sitting time while you're at the office or doing this can really help to manage glucose levels, reduce the risk of developing diabetes.
Got it. And was this from some of these inputs that led you to start what you started, that is enhanced for people to not only live better with the diabetes but exercise and perform better with the diabetes? Were these some of the possibly learnings from these events that helped you start enhanced?
Yeah, this is exactly it. So my team and I, we recognized that we have this incredible gateway to see what's happening in physiology, which is these continuous glucose monitor devices. So
Right.
these are devices that are able to measure regularly, every minute, every 5 minutes, what is happening in terms of glucose levels. The problem is that the person who is having to interpret this data has no context around this. And if you think of maybe the main 3 or 4 factors that you have that influence glucose, you've got your insulin levels, you've got nutrition, you've got exercise, possibly stress as well, you could add there.
Yeah.
Exercise is something that is so powerful in terms of the impact that it has on glucose levels, but there isn't a system to really recognize or easily recognize the impact that this is having on your blood glucose. So people are just relying on trial and error. They're not able to see into this. But we also saw that measuring exercise is increasingly easy, accessible from kind of a cost perspective, because so many people have wearables on their wrist, or there's different ways of measuring activity through your phone, etc. And by, at the first stage, putting this information together, contextualizing glucose, and helping the user to understand the impact of different types and intensities of exercise on their blood glucose, they can use this as a tool to incorporate to either reduce the risk of developing diabetes or to manage type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, if they're already living with the condition.
Got it. So how does your product really work? I'm going to be very keen in relaying this information to our listeners, because globally almost everybody will find great value in understanding more about this product. So is it a app that people can integrate their CGM and devices, and that will help me track my glucose level in real time? And will it also make sense of the data for me from insights perspective? Will it advise me what do I need to do next, etc.? Or how does it really work?
This is pretty much exactly, you described it there. So it's taking devices that people are commonly using. So
Okay.
exercise, sleep, nutrition, glucose trackers. We integrate with over 100 different devices. This was the first thing that we wanted to do. Integrate with all of the devices and make it super simple to bring that information together. So we achieved that, contextualize the information. So things like grouping the types of exercise that you've done so that you can recognize the impact of walking your dog versus the impact of doing like a gym session, or I don't know, going skiing or rock climbing or cycling. And then the next thing that we're doing is, and we have the versions of this that we're just testing internally, is that we have these training plan builders which are using agents that are sort of doing jobs on your behalf. So the way that we looked at this is diabetes is all around data and doing jobs from that data. So if we can bring that information together automatically and we can get agents to do the jobs on your behalf, it can take a huge amount of the weight load of decision making, interpreting the data, so that you can just do the physical activity that makes the most sense for you, or you can have the best fueling strategy that works for you.
So how can people go about it? Is it a free consumer side app that people can download, integrate their device, subscribe to a particular program, and go?
Yeah, so the app is available on both Android and iOS. It's free. The plan here is that the level that it currently has, i.e. the integrations, also the community side within the app, will always remain free. And then these more advanced training plan features, we will put a premium subscription on this. This is the way that we're going. The reason is it's largely like similar to something like Strava, you could compare it to, whereby we're gathering the information and then providing the insights.
Got it. And will it use pre-decided logics, pre-decided range, and give me insight based on that, or it's also integrating with the AI through which you can learn, and or it could be that it's coming up in future as well that it learns from my behavior and my data over a period of time, and then it's suggesting me what do I do next.
Yeah, this is something that we see as really a unique opportunity within this because um, so the current way that people are supplied information around diabetes and exercise is based on averages from results developed in the lab.
Yeah,
So what we are doing here is not looking at the averages that were developed by a small group of individuals in sort of a very controlled setting. We're able to look over the long term of how your glucose responds when you do specific types of activities so that the guidance will just get more and more personalized and accurate based on that. Um, the other thing is that physical activity is very it's quite easy to quantify really from
yeah,
wearables compared to other types of um, metrics such as nutrition, which tends to be difficult to really capture accurately. But with physical activity, we can have a lot of information around the intensity, the timing that's there, so we can really fine tune things in in terms of what type of exercise not only helps with your glucose management, but fits within your lifestyle, because that's also important.
yeah, yeah. And so, if you were to look at your power user, I know you are just starting out and it will only grow from here. Um, will your power user be an athlete who is doing a marathon, for example, training for it, has a CGM, and now has integrated with enhanced, and that user will get insights to plan the next nutrition or next workout, that you will consider a power user at this stage?
Yeah, so we knew that the early adopter was going to be somebody who's already pretty confident with exercising,
Yeah,
um, is already quite tech savvy, is using like a Strava account, has a Garmin, is regularly exercising, etc., and is very interested in data. Um, this has been the profile that's been there already. We have a lot of people who we had been speaking to who had these really elaborate Excel systems whereby they had been already kind of putting their data together. The number of people we came across who were already building sort of DIY spreadsheets to manage their
yeah,
data, to build their own training, to see what the impact of certain exercise events were happening on their glucose. And then when we introduced enhanced, they were incredibly happy because we just took that away and then we made it so all of the information was just seamlessly coming together. So that's the first type of person that we had. And there's quite a lot of users who fall into this bracket. Um, as we develop more, what we want is that it's not only catering for those who are currently exercising, but it helps those who are new to exercise, who are wanting to do like their first 5K, who are perhaps newly diagnosed and want to reintroduce exercise after understanding that they have to now start integrating glucose management, insulin dosing into their lifestyle, so how they manage that in the context of exercise. And then, so the other thing that I didn't mention is that really the initial power user we're focusing on is type 1 diabetes,
okay,
because this is really the group that we want to help. There's really an immediate need for understanding the impact of exercise around glucose management. There's also a lot of very driven individuals who want to do a lot of exercise already, but they just lack the tool to take a lot of that data management, that decision making away. But as we progress this, we will be moving it into type 2 diabetes, helping those who have access to continuous glucose management, because these CGMs are really powerful, but we want to help people maximize the use of them. So how do you incorporate physical activity to supplement the lifestyle changes that your doctor has suggested? How do you use those muscle contractions alongside glucose management so that you can help with weight management, you can help with glucose management, you reduce the risk of developing complications, etc.
Awesome. Very good. We will be rooting for you from this part of the world, and I'm sure you will have additional downloads coming in right after this podcast, because it's going to add great value to people. We will stay in touch and also be seeing how these progress. It's a fantastic mission and great way for people to take care of their health, to take care of their fitness together. Just taking the guess work out of it and quantifying with the help of data in the right way, because one of the points that you mentioned, that is, if you just see the average number, it is it is it is nowhere close to the being optimal from performance point of view, from understanding the health point of view, etc. as well, because that same average can be achieved in so many ways. And so knowing greater insights about the unique data points and making sense of those are going to be critical, and you are already doing that. So thank you, and we will, like I said, we will stay in touch and see how this progresses, and keep us posted as you go along this journey.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Sam.